Hello, welcome to this virtual workshop on how to write dialogue in fiction. My name is Liesl Miller. I am one of the librarians at the Cascades Library. I have a bachelor's in arts in creative writing, which I got in 2014. And so I've been writing for a lot of my young life and also my adult life. I don't have anything. I've had one thing published in my in my undergrad alma mater's literary magazine, and it won second prize at a short fiction contest. But otherwise, I'm very much a writer by hobby and for fun. So unfortunately, I won't be able to answer questions about publishing or anything like that. But any questions that you have about craft or about like going to college for writing, for creative writing, there's going to be a time at the end of this where I'll open the floor for questions if you have any. And then you can ask me anything that that jumps into your head. So because we've got a smaller group, I think it's going to be nice and cozy, which is great because that's kind of what I'm used to. When I was in school, when I was in college, it was a close knit group of students because it was a small school. So it's nice that we kind of have this smaller group to get to know each other and talk about writing dialogue. Which I have always thought is one of the hardest things when you're writing fiction, is getting dialogue right. You know, some people are so good at writing these, you know, beautiful scenes, like descriptions of, you know, of the setting, or like describing how someone looks or how a place is. And then the dialogue is just always so the opposite of that in some cases. Because it's hard sometimes, I think, to write dialogue that feels authentic, and that feels like it could be a conversation that happens. So I like to have, when I'm writing dialogue, I have these 7 tools that I like to use. I borrowed them from an author called James Scott Bell, and because I read about him when I was in school, and so I've used his advice basically in all of my dialogue writing endeavors. So I'll go ahead and I'll talk a little bit about those just because I found them so helpful, and you guys may also find them helpful. So his very first tip is to let it flow. Any writing teacher that you have is probably going to talk to you about a bad first draft, and that's basically just a saying. That just means, you know, when you're first writing your first draft of your novel or your short story or even a poem, don't worry about how it looks at first or how it sounds at first. Just get it out, because you'll have time to make it better later. But in the beginning, you just let it flow. You just let it out, get it on the paper. You know, don't worry about how it looks or about how it sounds, because this technique is going to help you come up, when you're writing dialogue, it'll help you come up with lines that you would never have thought of if you tried to get it right the first time. I can't tell you how many times I've sat at my computer or like with a notebook out in front of me, and I've just been like, what the heck am I going to make this character say? I have, you know, 8 million things that are going through my brain, and none of them sound right. And so it's easy. So my advice, and also James Scott Bell's advice, is to just type it. Get it out. Even if it's not good, even if it's not snappy, just get it out. Let it flow. And actually, you can often come up with a dynamic scene by writing dialogue first. So if you record what your characters are arguing about or stewing over or revealing, just write it all as fast as you can. Don't worry about how it looks, how it sounds, and then as you do, it'll all come out, and like I said, you'll be able to come back later and fix it and make it snappy. Also, as you're letting your dialogue flow out onto your paper, don't worry about who's saying what at first. Just write the lines. However best works for you. Just don't worry about which characters are saying things. Just get it out. And then once you have these lines of dialogue on the page, you'll have a good idea about what the scene's about. And it might be something different than what you anticipated. You might have thought going into the scene that the argument was about one thing, and then once you go back and read what you've written, you kind of realize, oh, this is so much more interesting than what I would have thought if I had just sat here and tried to write it. But when it's all stream of consciousness like that, sometimes you can surprise yourself about what you're going to write about. And so once you know what it is that you're writing about, that's when you go back in your narrative and you write the scene that goes with the dialogue and put in all the normal speaker attributions and tags, like he said, she yelled, whatever it is. So that's my first piece of advice, is to let it flow. Just get it out. Put it on the paper. The second advice that I have is maybe a little bit of a one that not everybody is comfortable with, but it's act it out. So obviously this piece of advice works the best in the privacy of your own home with your door closed, but I have found this exercise particularly helpful, especially when I already have some dialogue that I've written, and I need to make sure that it makes sense. It doesn't, if it's clunky and you say it out loud, you'll hear it. Like it might look really good on the page, but once you say it, then you'll realize, oh, nobody says that. Nobody has that kind of pattern of speech. So it helps once you already have the dialogue written on the paper. But James Scott Bell actually suggests taking it one step further and making up a conversation just in your head and say it out loud as you go. So to do kind of an improvisational scene, as it were. So his advice for this exercise is to make up a scene about between two characters who are in conflict. You decide what the conflict is, how serious it is, what the characters are arguing about, and then just start an argument with yourself. Just go back and forth and changing your actual physical location. So if you're like blah 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 to person A, and then you turn and now you're person B, and you retort blah 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 blah. So you go back and forth, changing your location like that, and you allow yourself a slight pause as you do, to give yourself some time to come up with a response. And you just play all the parts. You let yourself go, just like with the let it flow exercise. That's what this is, except for instead of writing it all, you're just speaking it out into the ether. And if you can, if you have some kind of voice recording device, like on your phone or a tablet or anything that you have, you can record yourself, and then you can play the recording back, so you can listen to that conversation again. Because sometimes what happens with me is I'll do that, and then I'll have something, and then I'll forget what it is because it happened 4 lines ago, and I'm already on the next thing, and I don't have time to go back and write down what it is because I want to stay in the moment. So sometimes that's a little tricky and cringy to hear yourself on the recording. I know that not everybody likes that, but when you do that, sometimes you might discover something in your scene that you hadn't previously imagined before. Another good way to kind of get into that mindset is for those of you who are in school still, I don't know if anybody is doing, I don't know if your middle or high schools have like improv clubs or theater programs or anything like that. But if you can find something like that to kind of help you get those creative juices flowing, so that you can be in actual improvisational scenes with real people and not just yourself in the privacy of your own home behind a closed door. Sometimes that can help too, because you'll be in a conversation in this made up scene with someone, and then you'll go home and think, oh, I really want to know where the rest of that scene was going to go. And then you'll have kind of this, this dialogue in your head of what you had previously been saying. And that can be a really good exercises too. Another tip, the third tip, is to sidestep the obvious. So in real life, when we're having a conversation, it's it can be a little back and forth, right? It's like, hello, Mary. Hi, Sylvia. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing. And that's just so boring, right? Like nobody wants to read that. That is, that's not very interesting. And it's one of the most common mistakes that new writers can make with writing dialogue. And so it's just like, you know, it's very back and forth, like an echo. And that dialogue is, that sort of dialogue is very on the nose, right? There's no surprise. The reader kind of just drifts along with very little interest. And it's just a little boring. And so while some direct response is fine, your dialogue will be stronger if you sidestep the obvious. So instead of just like, hello, Mary. Oh, Sylvia, I didn't see you. You know, I'm going to paste in the chat if you guys want to have a look in there. I'm going to paste a more interesting version of that short conversation. And I'm realizing that the the enter and indent feature isn't quite as it's, yeah. So the indent doesn't work, but that's okay. The scene just reads, hello, Mary. Sylvia, I didn't see you. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing. I need some coffee. So this exchange is immediately more interesting, right? Because why do they need coffee after talking to this person for 2 seconds? I feel like that's very telling. And so it's immediately more interesting and suggestive of the currents beneath the surface of the first example, which was just the boring, hello, Mary. Oh, Sylvia, I didn't see you. And so here's another way that you can sidestep the obvious. You can sidestep with a question, which I will again paste here into, oh, that's a great question, Tony. So how often to mention which character is talking is Tony's question in the chat. I have found that when I'm writing and a dialogue is going for more than 3 lines, that's usually when you say, you know, Sylvia said or Mary said. So like what I might do in this scenario is, hello, Mary. Sylvia, I didn't see you. Mary looked her up and down. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing, right? Because you don't always need to say, you know, Mary said or Sylvia said. You can kind of, and we'll get into this a little more later, but you don't always have to use the modifiers. Sometimes you can just describe the action. And so another way to do that, like with this other example that I'm going to paste in. So now it's, hello, Mary. Sylvia, I didn't see you. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing. Where is he, Sylvia? And so for this, you know, you might, like, we know that this is a conversation between Mary and Sylvia because there are only 2 people who are talking to each other. And so, you know, but if it's a group of 3 or more, you might need to explain who's talking more often. And so if I was going to have a qualifier here or like an action item, hello, Mary, Sylvia, I didn't see you. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing. Mary crossed her arms. Where is he, Sylvia? So that's how you know that Mary's the one talking, and what she's mad about, and you know that she might be upset because she's crossed her arms, and we don't know who he is or why Sylvia should know who he is. And if you want, you can take this scene and write something with it later, and find out for yourself who he is and why Sylvia should know. But all this to say, there are innumerable directions in which the sidestep technique can go. You can use the question, you can make a statement, instead of just the back and forth of it's a nice day, whatever. And so you can experiment to find a path that works best for you, and just look at a section of your dialogue and change some direct responses so that they are more interesting. Does anyone else have any questions before I move on to the next piece of advice that I like to give, / that James Scott Bell likes to give? All right, well, I'll continue then. So the fourth piece of advice is to cultivate silence. So instead of using a question or a statement, another powerful variation on the sidestep is silence, where the character doesn't respond or doesn't say anything in response. And it is often the best choice, no matter what words you might come up with, because silence can often speak more volumes than any dialogue. The author Ernest Hemingway was like a master at this. He was the best at this. And in his advice, James Scott Bell uses an excerpt from Hemingway's short story "Soldier's Home," which unfortunately I'm not going to be able to paste in because you really kind of need. I'll paste it in anyway, and hopefully we'll be able to figure out how. I'll try really hard to see. Yeah, it's not very helpful, so I'll just read it out loud. So this exchange from the short story is an exchange between a mother and her son. And so listen while I read and consider how Hemingway gets his point across by using sidestep, silence, and action. So it starts. God has some work for everyone to do, his mother said. There can't be no idle hands in his kingdom. I'm not in his kingdom, Krebs said. We are all of us in his kingdom. Krebs felt embarrassed and resentful as always. I've worried about you so much, Harold, his mother went on. I know the temptations you must have been exposed to. I know how weak men are. I know what your own dear grandfather, my own father, told us about the Civil War, and I have prayed for you. I pray for you all day long, Harold. Krebs looked at the bacon fat hardening on his plate. And that's the whole dialogue. Silence and bacon fat hardening, right? We don't need anything else to catch the mood of the scene. We kind of know by reading this, and even if it's not, a direct, Krebs didn't say anything, we see Krebs looked at the bacon fat hardening on his plate, and immediately we're like, oh, he's uncomfortable. He doesn't want to be in this conversation. And without us having to be spoon-fed that. So that's another really good way to sidestep that obvious, back and forth in a dialogue. And so when you're writing dialogue, you can have that thought about, what are your characters feeling while they're exchanging dialogue? And so you can try expressing it with the sound of silence as opposed to the sound of, someone making a response that they might not make. in real life. And I think this goes back to the question we had earlier of, you know, how do we know how often should we say which character is speaking? So basically, you know, Krebs's mother is the one who's speaking the most in this scene. And, you know, it's mentioned twice, I think. His mother said, and his mother went on. And so, and we know that Krebs has spoken once, even though it, and because it says Krebs said, and that's the only time he speaks. And then it goes immediately back into his mother's speaking. Yeah. Are there any questions about that kind of technique? All right, we're going to move on then. Tip number 5 is to polish a gem, is what we like to call it. So have you ever, anyone in your lives, have you ever been in an argument with someone, and only after you've gone home, you're replaying the conversation in your head and you come up with the perfect response? Or like you're thinking about it later as you're eating dinner and you're like, man, I should have said that instead of what I actually said, because what I said at the time was not very good. It wasn't a very good response. But this, what I just thought of, you know, 2 hours later, is the better thing to say. I wish I thought of it earlier, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could like constantly have those zingers at a moment's notice without having to wait for 2 hours before we come back, before we have that thought? The good news is that your characters can do that. This is the thing that's fun about being a fiction writer, is just everybody can be as witty as you want them to be. And so there is one arbitrary rule that James Scott Bell suggests, which is 1 gem per quarter, right? And in this case, gem is that zinger that we're talking about, right? The response to an argument that makes you think, oh, that's the best thing I've ever heard in my life, you know? And so when he says 1 gem per quarter, he means, you know, if you divide your novel or your short story into fourths, right? Into first act, second act, third act, fourth act, if you will. And so when you're polishing your dialogue, find those opportunities, 1 per fourth, to polish one of those gems. And so, you know, he says you do that like a diamond cutter. You know, you take what's rough and you tap at it until it's perfect. But just remember to use those kinds of gems sparingly, because the perfect comeback grows tiresome, you know, if it happens all the time, if you use them constantly. Then it's just kind of like, all right, great. Another tip is to employ confrontation. Many writers struggle with exposition in their novels. A lot of times, writers can use dialogue as kind of like a clunky exposition between 2 characters who already know something about each other. And that's not very interesting for the reader, right? But also sometimes they'll just put it in like heaps of large chunks of straight narrative, which is also kind of boring. And so like backstory, the thing that happens before the novel or the story opens, can be especially troublesome. And so one of the ways that we can do that is by using dialogue instead of having those big clunks of chunky exposition. And so James Scott Bell's advice is to create a tension-filled scene, you know, between 2 characters usually, because if it gets to be more than 2 characters, sometimes it can be a little much, you know, it can be like too many cooks in the kitchen. So if it's just between 2 characters, and maybe 2 strangers or 2 people who don't know each other very well, because then you don't have to worry about, you know, 2 characters who already know what's the problem, right? Because if it's 2 people who were like, oh, It's been 10 years since I last saw you, which was at the farmer's market. Oh, yes, and wasn't that the same day as the tornado that swept through town? And I mean, gosh, that's boring. Like, we get it. You saw each other for the last time 10 years ago. And if the tornado and the farmer's market are really important, we can put that in exposition earlier. But if characters are arguing, if they're in a confrontation, that can make an expository scene a lot more satisfying and interesting. So, for example, here's a clunky way to have information appear. Right? I'll post it in the chat and I'll read it for everybody because the formatting in WebEx is bananas. So what I have posted is a clunky exposition sentence. And so it just says, John Davenport was a doctor fleeing from a terrible past. He had been drummed out of the profession for bungling an operation while he'd been intoxicated. Yeah. So instead, if we place this backstory in a scene where John is maybe confronted by a patient who is aware of the doctor's past, which I will now also copy and paste into the chat and read out loud for everyone to hear. So instead, if we use this conversation, I know who you are, Charles said. You know nothing, John said. You're that doctor. If you don't mind, from Hopkins. You killed a woman because you were soused. Yeah, that's it. And so forth, right? Like, this is a much underused method, but it not only gives weight to your dialogue, it also increases the pace of your story. So instead of that really clunky, he was a doctor who had a troubled past, now we're right there in the scene, and the stakes are kind of higher in this way, I think, also. And so the final piece of advice that James Scott Bell likes to give is to drop words, right? So this is a favorite technique of a writer called Elmore Leonard. He died a couple years ago, maybe like 8 years ago, I don't know. But he was like dialogue master. And he loved to do this, where he would drop words in his dialogue. And so by excising a single word here and there, he would create this feeling of natural speech in his dialogue. It sounds like real speech. And so all of his all it just is like, it contributes to the characterization and the setting and the story. And so here is an example of a standard exchange, just between two people, just a conversation that two people are having. That's the wrong thing. Hold on a minute. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So here's just an exchange between two characters. Your dog was killed? Yes, run over by a car. What did you call it? It was a she. I called her Tuffy. And so that's just a standard exchange. But this is the way that Elmore Leonard did it in his novel, Out of Sight. And so notice the difference between what I just posted and what I am pasting right now, which is, your dog was killed, got run over by a car. What'd you call it? Was a she named Tuffy, right? It sounds so natural, and yet it is meaningful and not clunky. And notice that all it is a matter of a few words that were dropped, leaving the feeling of real speech. And as with any technique, you can always overdo it. You want there to be some words. And so just pick your spots and your characters with careful precision, and when you're using these techniques, because it'll work for some characters and for some stories, and for others it won't. But those are just some of the tips that I like to use when I am trying to write dialogue, just to make it sound more natural and less clunky, like it's a real conversation that's happening between real people, that's not boring, that's not unnecessarily expository, and I just think that those are some good advice. Okay, so I think it's time for us to do a little bit of a writing exercise. So I'm gonna do a little bit of dialogue. If everyone wants to take like a minute, maybe 2 minutes, and in the chat, you should be able to type in the chat, all of you. In the chat, come up with 1 or 2 phrases of dialogue, right? Like one or two sentences of one character speaking to another. It doesn't have to be in the same scene. Like, it doesn't have to be like, Mary and Sylvia who are talking to each other. It can be 2 different. It can be 2 different scenes. So just come up with like a line or 2 of dialogue, in a couple different scenes. You don't have to tell us what the dialogue, like what's happening in the scene. All I want is the dialogue. So like, I can get started. So I just wrote, "What are you doing here?" So if everyone wants to pick, take a minute or so, come up with a line like that, a line of dialogue, something that one character says to another. Post it in the chat, and then I will read them. These are awesome. These are all quotes that I want to see. I want to see where it goes. So yeah. So I'll post in a few of my own, because there are so few of us, and for the next part of this, I want to have some options. So give me just a minute. Let me open up my document here so that I know what I'm gonna put in. And you guys can use some of these as well. Okay. So now that we have a couple options of some dialogue starters, I want us all to choose one of these lines of dialogue. It doesn't have to be, actually, I would encourage not one that you brought in yourself. So one that someone else posted in. So I'll probably use Shay's "What a Day." Did you hear that? ... I don't know. What did I hear? And I want you to write a short, like a short scene of dialogue, you know, and it can and it can have some action in it. So, you know, it doesn't just have to be like you're reading a screenplay. You know, it can be descriptive. You can have some narrative in there as well. But choose a line or two of some dialogue that we've posted in here, and take a few minutes to write a short little scene about it, between two characters. I don't want there to be any more than two characters. It gets a little confusing. So take like 3 or 4 minutes. I think that should be enough time, because again, it's a very short scene. So if you have like a Word document on your computer, or if you have a notebook nearby, you can just write down a short little scene and then post it in the chat. And then we'll get a little bit of practice of writing dialogue. And then whenever you're ready, you can start posting your conversations into the chat, and I'll have and we'll read them. We'll read them together. I'll give you guys another 2 minutes before I start having you post your things. Okay. Okay, so no matter where you are, go ahead and stop your exercise. You can always come back to it after I log off. But go ahead and paste your things in. And oh my gosh, everything's so good. These are fabulous, everybody. These are all scenes that I want to keep reading. I want to know what happens next. That's really great. Yeah. This is great. I can tell that you guys really took some of those tips to heart. If you weren't already employing them in the past. So this is really great. I especially love just the action of this most recent one. Mary reached out into her pocket to grab a cigarette. You're stressing me out, kid. God, I need a smoke. That's such a powerful line of dialogue. That tells me all I need to know about that mother. Gosh, where was another one? I love this rapid fire one. This this mind your own business, sweetheart. Mind your attitude in my bar. What did you just say? That's great. I love how rapid fire that is. And I like this first one. He took 2 steps in toward her. Harriet hawed and hesitated. Well, it was open. It looked dirty. And I thought, you thought what? He snapped. This is great. These are all very, very good. All right. Yeah, I think everybody posted in the chat now. So, and if you didn't feel like it, that's totally fine too. But yeah, I think I'm almost out of time. So this will be the time now for me to answer any questions that you guys have, anything that I didn't cover that you would like more information on, or anything else. Oh, there's another one. Yeah, very good. That was my favorite cup. Paris sighed, looking at the shattered glass. Beautiful. Okay. If anyone has any questions for me, you can either turn. I think you can turn your mics on, and if not, then you can just post them in the chat.
People should be able to turn their mics on. They can also turn their cameras on if they'd like. Up to them, though. No pressure.
Right. Yeah. Any questions about writing dialogue, or about, I don't know, other techniques?
If no one has any questions, Liesl, do you want to talk about your program on the 14th?
Yes. If you guys enjoyed this, I'm going to be back next week on October 14th. That's a Thursday night. Same time, same place, here on WebEx at 6 p.m. And at that workshop, I'm going to be talking about writing impactful sentences. So how how to pare down your sentences to make them not clunky, and so they don't go on and on and on forever, kind of like how I'm talking right now. But that's I've always been better at getting my thoughts down on writing than I have been speaking. So hopefully you guys will come back for that one. And you'll have, and it'll be good. I do see there is a question. What do you believe makes strong dialogue in an action sequence? That's a good question, Erica. I think that something more than just the usual scene written for pacing someone through a story, the actual riveting moments. Yeah. So yeah, if you're in the middle of an action sequence, this is maybe showing my age, but the first thing that comes to mind of a powerful action scene, like a dialogue in an action scene, is I don't know if anyone's seen the Star Wars Episode 3, the one where Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi are fighting in the lava. But there's a lot of emotional there's a lot of emotion in those scenes, and I think that's the thing that makes powerful dialogue. It's is just asking yourself how your characters are feeling. Are they in this action sequence? Are they arguing with each other? Are they shouting to someone on the sidelines? And how are they feeling? That's I think that's part of what makes dialogue so powerful. Is it's kind of a window into how the characters are feeling, and so I think that that can no matter what is being said, I think that if you can show your character's emotions through that dialogue in an action sequence, I think you'll get the effect that you're going for. Do you have any favorite authors who use really bad dialogue but are capturing the reader by the story itself? Oh, that's a great question. So one of the things that I look for when I'm reading, when I look for books that I enjoy, is how the dialogue is paced. And so just kind of by default, I put down books that have really bad dialogue, and so none are coming to my brain right now. I can't really think of any authors that that have that poor dialogue in their novels but still have a compelling story. I know they exist. I just personally haven't read very many of them. Let's see, what's another question? Punctuation. Oh, that's a great question. So I didn't really get to talk about this, about like formatting in this talk, but it's very so one of the things to remember when you're writing dialogue is to make a new paragraph every time a new character speaks. And unfortunately, I can't show you in the chat because, like I said, the formatting of this chat is bananas. But for punctuation in dialogue, normally when a character is finished speaking and it goes into if they say, "Hi, Mary," hi, Mary, she said, you put in a comma before the end quotation. So I'll put an example of that, and then you put a period after the said, which I neglected to do. That was my bad. So hi, Mary, comma, she said. Regarding punctuation, like the use of exclamation points, which I think is probably what you're asking, I've always believed less is more. Like there is zero need to use superfluous exclamation points or question marks. You get the point across by just the one exclamation point or the one question mark. You don't need to go crazy with punctuation. It can, I think it can, superfluous punctuation absolutely can make or break a scene. You don't need a whole lot of it to get your point across, especially in in an argument or a funny scene. Your words will do the trick. And then what of profanity? How much is too much? How much is too little? Or should authors avoid profanity completely? Oh, I mean, it depends on your audience, I think. Like if you're writing a book for adults, I don't think it matters quite so much. But you know, the kinds of adults that you're writing for might care more or less. And I mean, again, this is something that I think editors will fix for you if you're trying to get things published. But I personally, I try to err on the side of less profanity, but that's just me. And it's I don't think it's necessary to avoid it completely if that's the kind of vibe you're going for. But again, it's about knowing your audience. So if you're writing like for teenagers, you might want to, you know, use it sparingly, but you know, not neglect it completely. And I mean, the kind of characters you're writing could have an effect on that as well. Like, I mean, if you're writing, you know, an older person, they might not swear quite as much as a younger person. So keep that in mind too, when you're writing dialogue. And then my favorite genre. Oh, thanks for asking. A personal question. I really enjoy like slice of life realistic fiction. I like to read stories about real people who might be experiencing real things. And I'm trying to get more into mysteries. I haven't read quite so many, but I'm trying to get more into them. So yeah, those are my favorite genres right now. Characters can have an influence. Do we write for the characters, the audience? Oh, great question. So when you're in your first draft, I would recommend writing whatever it is you want to write. You know, like when you're writing characters, you know, your characters are the vessel of your story. So keeping that in mind when you're writing dialogue, because anything for your audience, you know, that'll come out later. I always like to have another person read what I've written, because the first thing that you write is always kind of, like I said, it's you know, you just let it flow. You get your bad first draft out of the way, and that's when the revising comes, and the people who are doing your beta reading or your revising, who are helping you look through your work, are going to tell you what's helpful and what's not in your story. And so having an idea of in your mind of who you'd like to read your story is helpful, but don't let it be like the main make or break. You know, that kind of stuff can come later when editing is a thing that you might be doing. When a character has a flashback, should the dialogue be more of what happened or be more of the character's thoughts and feelings? Oh, that's a great question. I think it depends on the kind of flashback that they're having. Like if the flashback is a conversation, then the dialogue can be the main feature. But if it's like a memory of something they experienced, that should be more of like the character's thoughts and feelings, I think. Anybody else have any more questions? Thank you, Erica and Shay. It was so good to meet you guys.